Hi, and welcome to the Page 49 podcast. I am your host, Montgomery, the librarian with a library and a degree. So for this podcast, I got to interview Amy S. King, who is a young adult author, and the book that I just finished was called Gloria O'Brien's History of the Future. So sit back and enjoy, which I think is going to be a great podcast, and about almost a running time of almost an hour, so be prepared to kind of take your breaks whenever you need them, but I think you'll like it a lot. Amy, I'm very happy that you're on this podcast. This is my second Page 49 podcast, which I'm doing this for myself partly, but also I'm hoping for this for the library. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to do this for me.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Montgomery.
To your credit as a writer, and this is to an admission here, I don't read as a librarian as much as I would like to. It's been hard for me to kind of get back into reading, but I picked up your book, and kid you not, within a week's time, I had nothing else but I was focusing on your book. And normally that does not happen. So
that's wonderful.
So I was really engaged right from almost the very beginning, and what I was kind of interested about, and I was like, a good mark of a story is that you kind of always leave the reader wanting more, and I definitely wanted more out of this, because I was just like, things are happening, and I just want to continue with that. So my question was...
Can I ask you which book it was?
No, it was Gloria.
Oh,
Gloria O'Brien's History of the Future.
Okay, cool.
And again, another admission here, you never judge a book by its cover, but I picked your book because of the cover, and I'm like, because I'm more interested in sci-fi or stuff that has some kind of connection, and you definitely had that with some of the elements in this book. So, not kind of giving away, because I'm not talking about the ending here, mm-hmm. but in the case of Gloria, now that she kind of knows what's going to happen, would you ever consider writing a sequel to this book, or would it be just, it's enough, and we just move on to something else?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I get asked for sequels a lot because I don't think life ties up in a tidy bow. You know, anything in my life that's ever happened to me it never tied itself up very neatly. And with this book, it did give me potential for a book. I'm at my desk right now, and I'm looking at my I don't know what you would even call it, a file holder thing. And I did have an idea to write what would be a science fiction, more hard science fiction, I guess, that related to the future that Gloria saw. And I have a folder here for it, because it was one of the first times. It would really more be a companion novel versus, very like the way Paolo Bacigalupi did Shipbreaker and Drowned Cities. You can read those without having, you can read the second one without reading the first one.
Right.
But what happens to me is, now that we're talking, I'm 2-3 books ahead of that now. I'm already 3 books past writing that character and that story. So unless I have time to go back in and really read Gloria O'Brien's History of the Future again as the author and go, all right, now I'm ready. You know what I mean? Then I would be able to do it. But by the time that happens, the time doesn't happen. I mean, my life, my career life, we'll say, doesn't allow that time. And when I move on, in a way, the way you described yourself as a reader is sadly, I as a writer, I'm supposed to be reading, and I always was a voracious reader. That's probably why you became a librarian and I became an author. But it also slips off my radar because I'm so busy writing or raising kids or, doing stuff, flying around, visiting libraries, visiting schools. So the straight answer to that one is probably not. It probably won't happen. But I do have a folder with the name on it. And I did start out writing science fiction novels. That's what I wanted to, or for adults. They didn't get published, and we all want to thank our lucky stars for that, because they were awful novels. But I grew up reading science fiction, and that was the thing that drew me to that particular idea of either a sequel or a companion novel to Gloria O'Brien's History of the Future, was the idea that, I'd finally, now that I have some chops, could
Hmm.
could hit, hard science fiction again. So I can say to you that yes, I've thought about it more than any other book when it comes to a sequel or a companion novel, but no, I haven't gotten to it. Instead, I've moved forward and written other novels that are completely unrelated. So once you do that, it's kind of, you leave those other characters behind, I find.
Because I started reading Reality Boy, and I've noticed that you do have a pattern which I mean, for right now, I've noticed you talking in the first person. Is that much easier as opposed to having a narrator talk about the characters for you?
It's interesting. I also teach. I teach master's level writing at Vermont College, low residency program for writing for children and young adults. And I haven't done this lecture yet, but one day I'm going to call it, I think I'll call the lecture "Stop, It's a Trap," because because not only is first person hard to get away from, but first person present. First person present is one of the worst traps you can get into. Now, first of all, it's very difficult to write. So if you can pull it off and do it well, great. But then when you start pulling back and you start doing past, everything seems to move more slowly, and it's really, you're there going, I'm very bored by my book, I wonder why, and then you're like, oh, it's the tense. So I'm actually, it's funny you say that, because I like first person a lot. I like working in it for a bunch of different reasons. But because I think also as a reader it pulls you in, and I think those are the books that pull me in, the ones that are in first person. That said, some of my favorite books are in third person, and I'm looking. And my first books, the ones that weren't so great, were in third person. So I'm trying to get back to third person with a narrator. It's hard, but really, let me think. I mean, Vera Dietz, Please Ignore Vera Dietz, my second published novel, that was first person. But then what happens is when you write in first person, the other bonus of first person, but it's also a limitation, is that you only get to see the world through that person's eyes. That's it. They can't, read minds. You know what I mean? They can say, my dad is parsimonious, like the way Vera Dietz is. And so if she believes her father is one thing, then we believe it as a reader. So when I was writing that book, I decided then to give her father a first-person point of view as well, so that we could see him for what he really is. And then we realized as readers, oh, he's not really parsimonious, he's practical, and he cares very much about Vera, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, it still was too small. So then I ended up with this omniscient narrator in the form of a pagoda that sits on top of the town's mountain. And so, I love playing with first person. The book I just wrote for 2016 actually has one narrator, but she exists in 4 different spaces of time, meaning she's 10 or she's 40 or she's different ages. And all of them are first person, but she's different ages. So it's fun to play with it a little bit, but sorry, I went off on that.
No, it's okay.
I'm hoping to go back to third person and have a narrator one of these days. A lot of my issue, again, is time. I'm releasing a book every year. And I think to write a very... And I think each book chooses its voice. Like, every book chooses its own voice. Like Reality Boy, it's funny that you mentioned that one. He came to me, he said those first words that were in the prologue. I wrote them down. He gave me the tone for the rest of the book. I don't plan books ahead of time. I write by the seat of my pants, so I don't know what's happening that day when I'm writing, the same as if you're reading it, you don't know what's going to happen that day when you're reading it either. So it seems really organic, but at the same time, I'm actually dying to get out of my comfort zone, which is first person. But that won't happen now for at least a few years, we'll say, because I've already got the 2016 and a 2017 book written. So that's just how it goes.
Okay. Well, the reason why I brought that up, and I guess it's because for young adults, and I know us growing up, we all saw our worlds through our own eyes, and it was kind of limited like from a high school perspective. You thought that you were the center of your universe, and everyone else was just outsiders. For me, in high school, there was one book by Edith Wharton, Ethan Frome, that it still sticks with me. Because we see this kind of tragic person that we don't know about how that person got to be that way. We just assume he was always like that. But then as the story unfolds, we get to see he was a normal guy. He just made the wrong decisions, and he paid for it in the end. But it was just, I'm wondering if you use that kind of tone, if you use a third person, you're going to lose that young adult audience, and maybe that's why it's more appealing to be in the first person description of the world around them.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, I'm heading toward 50, and
I'm 2 years away, so.
What?
I'm 2 years away.
Okay, you're gonna get there a little faster than me. Just warning you, but I'm right behind you. And you know, I think that adults have the exact same problem, if you want to say as a negative, which I don't think it is a negative, but I think adults have we all live in a bubble. We all live in the eye bubble, I think. I think all of us live in, depending on how wide we can, how much we can widen our perspective and consider other humans and consider other ideas and all that. I think we all do live in that eye space. Half of my readers are adults. Most of the people that, and it's not because young adults popular and half of young adults books readers are adults. It just seems for some reason. I have a lot of adult characters that are fully formed. A lot of times they have a speaking part, like I just explained in Please Ignore Vera Dietz. But I do think that first person does do something different to a reader. I think it pulls a reader in more, especially if you can relate to the voice. And I think that certainly helps young adults, because I know with me it was Paul Sindel.
Right.
It was a book called Confessions of a Teenage Baboon, which is presently not being, it's out of print. You have to get it used, but I really hope that they reissue it like they reissued The Pigman also by Paul Sindel.
Right.
And that's also, The Pigman's in first person, just alternating narrators. But that is the book that stuck with me from my childhood, teenhood. And it was first person, and it was very real, and I think first person helped. That said, the book that sticks, some of the books that stick with me, I read a lot of Vonnegut, and he does a lot of third person, and I can feel, there is a different feeling. Actually, now that you mention it, there's a different feeling. Being told a story versus being in a story, being in a situation. So I don't know if it's a matter of young adult readers, that I would lose them if I went to third person, but more than that, just readers generally. I think that, and I don't have it here because my favorite bookshelf is downstairs, but I think Grasshopper Jungle by Andrew Smith last year, a lot of that was in third person, but it was really easy to follow. So if you haven't read that, try that one. And that's about the end of the world. If you haven't read that yet, you have to. It's awesome. But I think that one was in third person, and it reminded me of Vonnegut in that way, where I was sucked in because it was just so fast and interesting. I think you have to do that with third person, otherwise it's boring, at least for me. Yeah.
Now, as far as when you're writing your characters, for example, Gloria Bryan, she has a photography background, and I know that you also have a photography background, and it also appealed to me because I grew up in high school and also had photography. So It was interesting that, is that something that you deliberately put in some characteristics of yourself in the characters you write?
Every single character I write has to have something to do with me, even if it's just on I call it emotional, like I take my emotions and I give them to a character whom I don't know yet, but with whom I'm going to become very good friends. Kind of how it works. So I'm able to take emotional imprints and put them on the characters. And then there's those experience imprints. Yes, I mean, my college degree is in photography. So, and then with Gloria Bryan, it was a little bit more complicated because that's actually part of a book I wrote I took tiny bits from it, but I realized that when I started to write Gloria as a character, that she was actually the 3-year-old in an adult novel I'd written in 2004, and that mother did exist in another book, which is another funny, actually, answer to your first question, which is, would I ever publish that book? It's called White People Take Pictures, which now that you've read the book, you know that that's the name of the sketchbook that she finds in her mother's darkroom. So yeah. I mean, almost all my characters have to have something to do with me or something that's close to me, someone close to me, or I would never write about a person. I never wrote about myself. Nothing's ever been autobiographical, or biographical for that matter. And I've never stuck anyone in a book. That's just not fair. But I can definitely put traits in a book.
Okay.
You know what I mean? That definitely measure up, or that connect. So yeah, definitely. And Gloria and I have a lot in common. Really, she's the girl I wish was in a book when I was in school, so that I understood that it was okay to think the things I thought. You know, in the area where I grew up, it would have been nice to have a book that made me feel like I wasn't such a freak for thinking that women, were generally equal, and that doubting that was strange. You know what I mean?
No, I totally understand. I mean, my daughter is now 14, and she just started high school yesterday. So I'm always wanting to be of the mindset for her.
Yes.
Don't be limited by anything that you see around you.
Hey, yeah, I know. I have two daughters.
Even when in Halloween, she dressed up as Captain America. She dressed up as Doctor Who.
Good.
She never thought about being the princess unless she wanted to be Snow White, which she did one year.
Yeah.
But it was just one of those things.
Yeah.
I'm not going to censor her at all. I want her to feel this is fine.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm.
And leading to Gloria Bryan, and because a lot of the talk around the book, and I was trying to understand feminism. And to me, when I think about feminism, this is going back, and I'm not sure.
You and I go back pretty much the same way, yeah.
Okay, so when I grew up in the 70s, to me, feminism was going to be watching One Day at a Time with Bonnie Franklin, who was Ms. Romano, with the heavily emphasized Ms. Romano, or Maude, in which these were women that were kind of barking back at men or would not take that kind of arguments, to be lesser or unequal to men.
Right.
But in Gloria Bryan, I didn't see that. I just thought that, she's just like a good character.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because you see, I saw Maude and I saw Bonnie as a single mother, who, at that time in the 70s, when we looked at One Day at a Time, and we looked at shows like that, those were the shows I was watching, and I found them to be totally normal to me, which is why it was so shocking to find out that, when I got to the kickball field when I was 10, they'd be like, girls aren't allowed. I'd be like, I'm sorry, but I'm a good kickball player. You want me on your team. I don't know what your problem is. And then I would just play. I would just barge in and play. And then they'd start picking me for the team, and realizing it slowly. But I never saw the barking, and I think that women at that time, because the ERA was introduced and needed to be ratified before 1980, I think that there were many women who'd been working very hard and who were getting very little pay. I'm only my age, and I've always been underpaid. Every woman actually has always been underpaid. To this day, it hasn't changed. So it does cause anger, but I never saw the anger in those characters. I actually found it as witty, because we finally understood, hey, we have something we haven't been allowed to have. I mean, my own mother wasn't allowed to put her name on the deed to our house, her first house, even though she worked a full-time job as a nurse, the same as my father worked a full-time job, as something else. So I think that at that point it did, I don't think the turn-off of feminism started until after I left for Ireland in the 90s. When I came back, all these, nobody wants to use the word feminism anymore. It's a real turn-off, and it's very strange to me, because if you look it up in a dictionary and you don't agree with it, well, then you've got to really look deep inside. Because in a dictionary, it just says the equality between men and women. And it actually does mean between men and women. It's not a zero-sum game. Women don't want to take men's power. They just want to get paid for their work, or they just want to not be discriminated against. They want to be able to go into their doctor's office and say, hi, I have a problem with a part that, that other 50% of the population has, just like me, and I need to talk to, and not have men legislate that. That's imagine women legislated. It just didn't. It's very difficult to kind of look at the whole idea and just see that it really is just about, hey, can we get a fair shake here? But the word's really, really gotten beaten down. When I came back from Ireland, I was very surprised at how the word feminazi had been invented by quite a colorful character, and it gets used a lot. At the same time, every single movement has extremism, all right? And I have a Post-it note right here on my wall, which my friend, Ichad Trujillo, she's mi hermana, but she says, we do not subscribe to the extremists. And I wrote it there, and she said it on the phone one day, and that's the thing. I think that that's maybe what you saw in the book, is the idea that, look, I'm extreme in the way that I help run V-Day in my area. Therefore, I raise money for women and girls in the Congo who are having a horrific time during the worst war since World War II, which we never hear about on the news. But I raise that money. I'm extreme in my passion for trying to help women and girls, but I'm just as extreme in my passion to help men who've been through the same thing. So to me, it's, I don't know, and feminism has always been linked to the survivors movement and the children's movement. So the minute you can't accept feminism, then we have children, and other issues that are really being ignored. Everything from, child trafficking or human trafficking to survivor movements, including male survivors, of which there are many. So I'm sad that the word has gotten a bad rap, but in actual fact, the dictionary definition still stands for me, which is I care about the equality of all people. I don't care where they're from. I don't care what race. I don't care what gender they are. I don't care who they love. I just think everyone should really get a fair shake.
Right. I just think that was funny. Reading all that, and then in the plot point where you had the Family Protection Act
yes.
come into play, which was the irony of all of this, was that you would block every woman having any kind of right because of what they proposed was the loophole.
Yeah.
Which was just amazing that this could ever happen, and yet it's kind of almost there. I mean, Planned Parenthood is kind of like in the news lately, and
yeah.
I can see this coming down the road, and even Trump, to some degree, reminds me of Ned, who kind of leads that point of kind of looking women as second class with his remarks and really male point of view. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe somehow I drank a bath somewhere. But I'm like,
I'll make you feel better real quick. The future in Gloria O'Brien's History of the Future is a parody of the present. And for you to be able to look at it that way and then go, okay, and if you look and see the lists of how many laws have been or how many bills have been thrown at just women, and not just reproductive rights either, all sorts of different things. There's been I think I saw this year, it was either, I'm going to use the lower number, I'll say it was like 300 or 400 bills nationwide. It's just constant. People are constantly trying to legislate women, and it's just like, no one's legislating men based on the fact of their gender. It doesn't make any sense. And so, and it's funny you say that thing about Trump. I mean, he's entertaining. We got to give him that, but he does really, he is of that mindset that we aren't really equals in that way, and he is a very different. And I don't really watch politics. I vote like crazy. I voted no matter where I lived, but I don't really talk about him. But he's an interesting guy altogether. I think he's doing exactly what he wants to do. He's grabbing a lot of headlines with a lot of really wild stuff. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, I'm just expecting the fallout to happen anytime soon.
I can't tell.
First debate, but I'm like, it hasn't stopped. I'm like, there's going to be a point in which the followers, I'm not going to follow him anymore. But I'm like, it hasn't happened yet. So I'm just kind of worried about that kind of future. Though.
Yeah. Well, at this point, too, I mean, you got to remember even just the last two elections, even that if I can pull them up in my brain, I think, well, I think last time around we had all these certain, one of the parties, so many people were just talking about, how rape wasn't really a big deal. Rape, not a problem. And you're like,
right.
What? Well, she was wearing sandals. So that's just, an invitation or whatever. They said the weirdest things. And it's just so interesting because, the culture is really, the culture is suffering, and I'm raising girls in this culture too, and it's difficult. So I was thrilled to hear that, like you said, you tell your girls exactly what you need. You say you can do anything you want, and you can be anything you want, and you can be anything you want for Halloween. But if you go into a Halloween shop and try and actually buy a Halloween costume for a girl, it's a sexy Halloween costume for the most part, which is why, my girls make their own. So it's a very funky culture, and it's very hard to navigate. It was hard enough to navigate in the 70s, which it wasn't really. I wore boys' jeans and sneakers every day, whereas now it's really quite it's quite hard to navigate, and everything they see and then they hear things like politicians saying things about women that are really quite outrageous. And it's a funny mix. I mean, I think that's the idea of I don't know, reading, really. Come back to reading. When you read, you really get to make your own mind up about things, and you don't become a follower. That's the one thing that I find interesting about so many people that really get into politics. That's all they got. A bit like Ned. That's all they got. They just have politics, and then that's all they can talk about. And then they have a guy that he says everything I believe in. I can't find one person on the earth that can say everything I believe in other than me, because I have formed it from reading different books, and I don't fit into any particular box, even politically. So it's sort of, I think that's why reading is such a great thing, because it helps you think. You may not agree with what you're reading, but it might actually be interesting to read about something, I don't know, that you don't agree with. But yeah, it's a funny. But yeah, the future in Gloria O'Brien's History of the Future is actually a parody of the present. It is a parody. I mean, look, he's Nedrick the Sanctimonious. I mean, I had fun writing that. Let's be fair. But that is a reality. I've had that boss. I've had that experience. I've had that person arguing with me. I've had that protester outside my show when I'm trying to raise money for local nonverbal young rape victims. When you're trying to raise money for the community, including these people's children, if this horrible thing ever happened to them, and they're protesting your show because I'm not sure why, it's because you're a feminist, and therefore they don't like the idea of the show, never seen it, don't know anything about it, don't know where the money's going, but they're going to show up with their picket signs. That, to me, is a person who needs to read more. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's one of those, I as much as I don't like working at my branch, because we have a lot of homeless people, but honestly, they have no place else to go to.
No.
So what do? They read. So it's interesting that that's what they choose to do with their time, is just read, as opposed to those who are working, who have lots of money and don't choose to read. So it's kind of a weird.
They believe that TV. That's the number one thing. If you're reading Reality Boy now, you'll understand how I feel about TV by the end. I haven't watched it in 15 years, so.
But do you still? Because you did make a reference in the book to something that you saw on Twitter, on YouTube, which I saw that video in which the woman who was texting.
Yeah, that actually happened in my head. That's the mall. That's my hometown.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you have to have seen this somewhere, because I'm like, I know that video.
Oh yeah, I'm on the internet. I definitely get my news that way, and I get it from as many sources as I can. I try and get as many sources as I can. I cannot stand the 24/7 news cycle, because you, just like me, remember real news. Remember when they reported on a thing and they would say, film at 11? See,
right.
Film at 11 meant, hey, you're watching prime time, whatever it is. You're watching MASH maybe, right? And then they're like, hey, there's a fire. And in my area, there's a fire in downtown Philadelphia. News at 11, film at 11. And they would have from 9:20, when that spot ran, to 11 to actually find out the facts about a story and then give it to you in fact. Whereas now it's 24/7, everybody's competing, and like the beginning of every single news story that I can think of that I've paid attention to has been incorrect. I remember checking in on Sandy Hook in the first hour or two after somebody knew that something had happened, and it was reported that 2 adults had died. That was it. And then I checked in 4 hours later. Well, things changed quite a bit. I wish they would just not have to compete to to lie to us, really, because that's what that is. That's a bum news story. You don't give us bum news, then give us good news, or worse news, or different news. It's either it is or it isn't. And now we have news stations that, I mean, this is the whole strangeness with TV now. News is that facts don't really usually have two sides. So, and we don't really have news like this happened. Instead, it's this happened and it's all somebody's fault. Whose fault is it? And all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I get my news. I get my news on the internet for the most part, but yeah, I stay away from the television completely.
Yeah. So, to kind of go back to your sci-fi roots, what led you into that field? Because for me, it was Star Wars that kind of really opened my eyes.
Yeah, you and me both, buddy. All right, I love Star Wars is like, and we all know what the first three. You can't get better than that. And I'm sure you own the undoctored ones too, the original screenings, because of course you do. I hope you do anyway.
I still have it somewhere, my VHS copy.
Okay, good. So yeah, I love Star Wars. I mean, even to this day, like that's our nightly like TV watching is going to Netflix and watching Star Trek. So I've been showing the girls Next Generation, which is fun, and I can't wait now. There's the ones after that I never watched. I watched a little Deep Space Nine, and I can't remember the name of the third one, but I hear it's great. Oh, not third, but next.
It was Voyager.
Voyager, that's the one.
So
I love space. I love it. I as a kid would look at the stars, and I even said only last night to the girls when we were watching, I said, if they really do cryo, like they could freeze me and I could come back and I could say, just unfreeze me when I can get into a spaceship. That's it. I don't care if I'm sick. I don't care I don't even care if I can't see.
Just do it already.
Yeah, if I can't hear, if it wrecks everything about me, but I'm living and can feel and be sentient even just a little bit and be in a spaceship, I'm there. Like I love space, and I've always sort of, I've always had a belief that universe is very large, and I really hope somebody finds this and they're nice, but I don't know how nice we'll be to them because we're kind of weird Earthlings. But really, my love for science fiction came from a misnomered science fiction writer, and it was Kurt Vonnegut. He did write science fiction type work. It wasn't hard sci-fi. It was no hard Bradbury or Asimov or any of those. But Kurt Vonnegut, the way he was able to include the sci-fi threads in his realistic stories, and I'm sure you can see it in my work, that to me is perfect. It means we can talk about the bombing of Dresden and the fact that it killed more people than the Hiroshima bomb, and at the same time we can be on, another planet, doing something else happening, and just be able to distract your reader from the horror of reality with the fantasy of this wonderful, science fiction, and science-based. That's the one thing as well. It's very science-based. I mean, I joke, and a lot of people call me Spock. I joke that I'm a Vulcan. And, that's probably, if you talk to a therapist, it's probably not the best thing to be a Vulcan. But it's one of those things where I love logic and I love space. That's really it. And I just grew up reading science fiction magazines, science fiction stories. I can't say I didn't read A Wrinkle in Time 9 million times. I did. Little, just strange little things, magazines, whatever. But science fiction, yeah, Star Wars, space, absolutely. Han Solo, I mean, he's mine. Just want to let you know. I get dibs on Han Solo if he's real. That's all I want to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with that.
That's cool.
For me, one of the things that I like is Philip K. Dick.
Oh my gosh, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Is it? My copy's so worn, it's held together with packing tape. Yeah.
My understanding the way things are through his eyes, how things are not always the way they seem. I'm starting to believe that a little bit more every day about us being like in a hologram.
Yep.
That this is all made up, and I'm just really kind of upset. I'm like, really, if this is what life is all about, then I'm like wasting a lot of time doing a lot of nothing. So I'm like,
Isn't that
but I'm like,
interesting? That's interesting.
God, I just don't want to have this moment. I'm like, what? This is someone else's dream or that kind of thing. I'm like, oh my God, really? You could have told me that before.
Right.
It's kind of like,
It's great though. I mean, isn't it cool that like that kind of that can now I'm going to start thinking I'm going to be at the gym and I'm like cuz I've just joined the rec center so that I can, swim during the winter, and I'm there going, gosh, I really hate like being on stationary bicycles or whatever. And now I'm going to be there thinking, if this is somebody's dream and I'm wasting my time on a bike that doesn't actually get me anywhere, I'm going to be
right.
pissed. But yeah, true. And this is the bonus of it though. Sometimes, like, I don't know, and that's the wonderful. I think that's the greatest thing about science fiction is that it's exponential. It really is. It just expands and expands and expands, and it goes back to that idea of I like to explore things that hopefully can open minds and open. Like I'm doing these things with my hands, but you can't see them because this is a podcast. But like, imagine I'm looking like through a pretend telescope with my, my hands, and it's really tight, so all I can see is a tiny bit of my computer screen. And then we open it and open it and open it, and suddenly I'm just got blinders on like horses. And then suddenly we take those off and open it, and then suddenly you can see so much. And that's why I like science fiction and why I use elements of like magic realism and especially surrealism with this new book that's coming. I like using those because it just makes your mind, if your mind can do it, if your mind can do it. There are people who are like, this is too weird, and that's fine. And there's a lot of people who don't read science fiction because it's too, and I don't read high fantasy. I can't. I don't read high fantasy. I try, but I can't. But I love being able to find that one thing that does click into a person's mind that has them suddenly go just exponential. Like, and for some people it is high fantasy. They can believe in unicorns. I can't, but I can't say that too loud because my kid's downstairs and she does believe in unicorns. Whereas I can believe in, some very surreal things or very science fiction things. And like you just said, that life is really just someone else's dream and this is a game, in which case they're listening to us and getting a good laugh right now.
Pretty much. It was like, oh, look what I made him say. So I'm like, come on.
Look, I can make her say this. I can make her say this.
Look, he's going to eat the whole pint of Ben & Jerry's. I told him to do it, and he's doing it. Look, it's funny.
Oh,
so let's talk about your new book, I Crawl Through It, because I think it's kind of going towards more, not science fiction, but I think you're delving more into what you want to do with sci-fi or science fiction books.
I think you're right. I think I just got my first hardcover. This is with the Little Brown. When they send me the new book, they send me one copy, and they send me, I'm going to knock on it. They send me the hardcover, okay? And they wrap it. It's all very sweet. They send a nice note with it. And, I've had advanced copies for a few months now, and it's always different when you get that hardcover. The first, but this book is really different for me. But it's not. I mean, it's not going to surprise my readers, I don't think. If you got through Gloria O'Brien's History of the Future, this is almost a natural step. But it is surrealism, contemporary. So it bends reality quite a bit, and I like bending reality because I find reality pretty bending all by itself. It's bendy, but it's about 4 teenagers who are trying to escape. This is so funny because I've tried to describe this book a million times, so I'm doing my best here. But
okay,
it's about 4 teenagers. It's told from 3 and a few other perspectives, and they're trying to escape kind of their lives. They're trying to escape trauma, maybe. They're trying, depending on which character they're trying, but on a whole, their environment is a school where they are put through tests that don't mean anything to them, but assess them for some other purpose. And they're all geniuses. One is I was a former literacy teacher. I've met people who can't read who are complete geniuses. So this does not have anything to do with education. It has to do with your mind and the possibilities it has, okay? But one's a biology genius, one is a physics genius, one is a poet, and then the other one is actually I'm just going to call her a life hacker. She's awesome. She calls herself a home economics genius, but they are all being put through intruder drills. And nobody's ever asking them how they are. It's interesting. I was in Kansas last weekend, and I was trying to describe the book, and I was failing just as much as I'm failing right now. And the young woman that was interviewing me, she was fantastic. And the thing that I'd said was, you guys have to do these intruder drills. And I know because my husband is a teacher, and he's had to do lockdowns and this sort of thing. And I'm like, what's interesting is that they will prep you to the end of the earth to take that standardized test that changes for the poor teachers. They have a vocation, they have a love of teaching, and instead now they have to just prep people for tests. And then they are graded on how their students perform. Didn't matter little Joey didn't get breakfast this morning, but, or never had a pair of sneakers that were new, or, what's going on at home, and we all know so much is going at home. We all know there's a lot going on at home, but now teachers are being assessed by this. But worse to me still are that students are, and they're made to go through this. And how fun is that? So they're there and they're being kind of put through drills so that they can pass a test, and people are always checking in with them. How's it going? Are you understanding this concept? How are you doing with this? And then they're made to stand in the corner and against a wall while an alarm goes off. Cover the window, lock the door, cover the window in the door, and make themselves small in case someone comes to shoot them to pieces. And not one time has anyone asked them how they are after that. And when I said this to this young woman, she said, "Oh, my God, you're right. I feel horrible after intruder drills. I feel like I have some sort of PTSD every time I have to do one." And I'm like, why aren't we asking the right questions? Why aren't we caring about this? Why aren't we looking at it as an epidemic, which it is? Why aren't we looking at it and really trying to solve it? And then, of course, we go back to politics and how it's impossible to talk politics in this country right now. So, with the division. So it's interesting because it's immediately politicized. Every shooting is immediately politicized. Somebody talks about gun control inside of 5 to 10 seconds, and then everybody splits. And it's like, listen, nobody's come for them yet. Could you stop freaking out? No one's come for your guns yet. Let's talk about the little children who died today. Let's talk about the fact that your children are in school being taught how to hide in a closet. That's harsh. You and I had to go through bus drills, I bet you, and fire drills. Did I ever see fiery, crazy things on the news with schools on fire? Never. No, it was just we learned how to escape the school in case of a fire. It was simple. This is different. These kids see these stories, man, and they know that it's happening. So when I say that, that's why I wrote the book. As for explaining the book, it's very difficult. It's about a kid who's building an invisible helicopter. The girl he loves, who is incredibly distant from everything. She's always wearing her lab coat, and she's really good at dissecting frogs. It's about their journey to a place called the Place of Arrivals, where everyone is perfect, which, of course, either does or doesn't exist, right? And it's about a walking digestive system, meaning a girl who swallowed herself and is inside out, and how she turns herself right side in. And it's also about a man who lives behind a bush. Again, failed completely at explaining this to you. But there's no way. It's a surrealist novel. You know what? The ones I read, I can't describe. Go ahead. Try and tell me what Terry Gilliam's Brazil is about. I've watched it 25 times. I still can't describe it to anybody. Same goes with Burroughs. Same goes with a lot of contemporary surrealism that I've read recently. I enjoy it thoroughly, but all I can do is hand someone the book instead of trying to explain it to them. But this one, it's not too far out there, and it does have a hook, and it has that first-person present, actually. And it does, the other thing is that the school is receiving bomb threats every single day. And so that's the absurdity, I guess, of the whole thing, and the surreal angle is that since they're constantly getting bomb threats, they just pretty much decided to just have school outside from now on, and things like this. So it's got a lot of strange things in it, but it's the book I've wanted to write for ever. and it's the book I wrote when I quit writing because I thought I wasn't going to publish anymore. I was just done with the whole publishing game, and I sat down and just started writing it because I didn't care. I didn't care about getting it published. I just wanted to write something that shared, obviously, some passionate feelings about what my kids and your kids and our kids in America are dealing with that we're not talking about, and which is, if you read my entire, all of my books, you'll know that that's pretty much what I'm about, talking about stuff no one else wants to talk about. I was a very annoying child, you can imagine.
One of the elements that I loved about Gloria Brine was that, yes, they drank a bat, and it gave them this power of looking into someone's future, their past, everything that about their life, and endless timelines. But with the fact that I love, and it's kind of like what was great about the first, it's episode 4 of Star Wars, was that there was this force. You didn't really have to explain it. You just kind of accepted that. So you didn't really have to explain, well, how are they getting this, this vision, other than they drank a bat. Well, that's all you need to do. And there you have it. Whereas episode 1, you go into midichlorians, and then you just ruin the essence of what's magical about the Force. And here, thank God you didn't do that, because you didn't have to explain, well, go to a doctor and I can see there's elements of bad in you.
No, yeah,
didn't have to.
It's fun, and this is why I put magical realism in my book. When you're done with Reality Boy and taking a break from A.S. King books, read Everybody Sees the Ants. I think you might enjoy that, mostly because you and I both grew up during the end of the Vietnam War, but also, or during it, and then at the end of it. But because the use of magical realism in that was fun. And it's funny because I do have people write and ask me, but how? But how? Because some people really need to know how. They're like, how? And I'm glad that actually you just used episode 4, as an example, because that's what I'm going to say now. Well, do you believe in the Force? Are you down with Yoda? If you're down with Yoda, you don't have to ask how. And, but yeah, people do ask, and they'll sometimes write and say, the end of this book was a cliffhanger. I'm like, no, it wasn't. You raced through the last 50 pages. Have a look again. But the idea is that, to me, a book is to make a book. My favorite kinds of books to read are the ones that make me think and expand, and kind of, like I said, that exponential sort of, suddenly you're 40-something, and you're like, what if it's all a game? All because of Philip Dick. You're like, what up? What's with this? And so that's exactly, and I think that is why I always liked sci-fi. It's always why I liked, different books that made me really expand and think. And I think if you explain too much, then you are doing that a disservice. I mean, nobody ever describes why when it comes to sci-fi. It's funny that you said that. I never noticed with the whole midichlorian thing why that scene annoyed me so much. I think I was just so annoyed by Jar Jar Binks that I ignored that. I don't,
Although in the Clone Wars, because I watched the whole animated series, there was a couple episodes that he was in, and they actually were written really well for him. I'm like, wow, if they did that in episode 1, I would have been so less, angry about it.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, this is, and I mean, I think it's interesting because, I mean, the Force, I believe in the Force, we all feel it. I mean, I have a thing, like when you're reading a good book, or when everybody has it for a different thing. It could be when I have a friend who feels it when she goes to church. I feel it when I listen to music. Some people just have that intense joy, or that intense joy, or that feeling of like, this is right, whatever it is. I get that when I read great books too, and that's how I felt when I it's still how I feel when I watch Star Wars, especially when I watch with my kids and they're into it. You're like, what? Like my kid, loves the Millennium Falcon. Like she will always love the Millennium Falcon, and she has Star Wars Vans. I'm like, this is so cool. I couldn't afford Vans. But you can have this. I can't afford these Star Wars Vans, but you can have them. Yeah. I wish I was you. That's where I am. But anyway, so I do think that, I think that not explaining, and I think that's kind of the fun of this new book too, as I crawl through it, is that, there's really no point in asking me if the helicopter was real or not. But in fact, you do find out in the end whether it is or not. And it is dependent upon whether you believe or not. And it's very like all those other things, just like the Force, funnily enough. Either it's real because you believe, or it's not because you don't. And that's pretty much really what so much of our lives, so many of us, our lives are based on that, whether it's what we believe spiritually, or even what we believe day to day. I mean, there's a lot of people walking around who really believe that, I think a lot about fear, whether fear of difference. Yeah. So I live in a very interesting area, or I grew up in a very interesting area where, you will have, because I have white skin, I'll have someone come up to me and say something completely racist to me, as if I'm going to agree with them. And I stand there awkwardly, and then I say whatever I can when I'm done, and then I disappear really fast, and I make a mental note to never really hang out with that person again. And this has been my experience since I was young. And it's something I'm really dying to explore in a book soon, because our country is exploding with hatred, and we need to figure something out about that. So even those sorts of belief systems, much like Nedrick the Sanctimonious and Gloria O'Brien, are really important to some people. And it's, I don't know, now I'm rambling.
It's all right. But since we are kind of running out of time, I'm just wondering, as far as any book tours you have coming up in the near future?
Well, I am going to be around. It's funny you say that, because I just made it, and since I'm in front of my computer, I can click. I am going to be, where am I going to be? Up here in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey. You can always check my webpage for tour information. Just click on the word tour in the menu, and that is what is my webpage is www.as-king.com. Or honestly, you could just Google A.S. King, and that should come straight up. But I will be launching the book, I Crawl Through It, on the 22nd of September. In America's Coolest Small Town, and that was voted. That's not just something we say. In Lititz, Pennsylvania. Then I'll be in New Jersey 2 days later, and then I will be in Eugene, Oregon, the first week of October. I'll be at the Salt Lake City Book Festival on the 10th of October. I'll have a public library event on the 15th of October in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And then I'll have an event near Philly. I'll have an event out near Chicago. And then I go to a really cool conference in Minneapolis, and I'll be doing an event in Minneapolis, I think on the 23rd of November. So there you go. But you can always find all sorts of information about me on my website. And I have a blog as well, so I keep people updated there. Although a lot of times I just write blogs for my parents, because I'm so lucky to still have them, and I know they read my blog. So it's like, hey, Mom and Dad, this is where I was. Look,
You got two more than me that read mine.
This is it. I mean, I feel very fortunate to have them, especially considering some of the things that they've been through, that they've survived. So yeah, so you can always keep up with me there, but not a lot of tour action for this book. I have a lot of books to write. I have a middle grade book coming out in 2017. I never thought I'd write for younger readers, but I'm so glad I did. I'm so thrilled about it, and I got to talk about things in my childhood in this book. I got to put me at 14 into an 11-year-old boy. It was the coolest thing in the world. And that's called Finding Marvin Gardens. That'll be out, and it'll be on the Scholastic list. So, so everything's rolling along here. That's about it.
Any chance, perhaps, you're going to be at the ALA conference in Orlando next year?
That is always up to my publisher, and there's a better chance next year. Yeah, I usually go to ALA. When is it? You say it's in Orlando next?
In Orlando in 2016.
Okay.
So because I live in Miami, that's definitely I can afford to go to Orlando.
Yeah. I didn't know it was in Orlando. That's cool. I'm really sad I missed San Francisco. I was so sad. I actually went to Mexico. I was like, you're not taking me to ALA? All right, fine. I'm going to go to Mexico. That's kind of how I do it. I make myself feel better, because I'd much rather hang out with librarians on a conference floor than go to the beach. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. But it does make up for it. But there's a 50-50 chance, as always, that I'll be there. But you'll You know, I miss ALA. I haven't been in. I was there for a very short time in Vegas. Who wants to go to Vegas at the end of June? Not this girl. But anyway, well, thank you so much for interviewing me, for having this conversation. This is wonderful that you had me on the
Thank
podcast.
you. I wish we had this kind of conversation when you came down to the beach.
Totally.
I just wish we had a bigger crowd.
That was, it wasn't advertised. I mean, we didn't even have it organized, I don't think, until a week before or two. I think it was a week. But I got to tell you, your beach is the best beach I've been to. And I went to Mexico. The seaweed came in. It was crazy seaweed. I don't mind. I'm a swimmer. I love the sea. I'm a squid. But your beach was probably the best beach I've been on since Negril, since my time in Jamaica. And I got to say, I really want to get back down there. So there's a decent chance I'll be back down, and maybe next time we can organize an event that's really teen centered and get in. I think that's what we should do.
So that ends my podcast for this episode of the Page 49 podcast, and I want to thank Amy S. King for granting me some time to pick her brains about her book, as well as talk about some Star Wars, which was really, really, really cool. So I'm glad that all came about. So if you want to contact me, do so at the Monster Sci-Fi Show at gmail.com, which is my email. You can also find Page 49 on Twitter, as well as my Monster Sci-Fi handle with the SYFY handle on Twitter. Again, this is going to be my Page 49 spinoff from the Monster Sci-Fi Show podcast. So eventually it's going to have its own email address, so forth, but for right now, I'm kind of piggybacking on my old one. So if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to contact me. Alright? So again, I'm probably going to do another podcast. I'm not sure as to who or what the topic will be, but I will keep you posted, so keep listening to my shows, and take care, everyone. Good night.